So many of us have been inspired and haunted over the past 12 months by the story of Rachel Goldberg, the Israeli-American mother of the murdered hostage Hersh Goldberg Polin. Her courage, her resolve, her persistence, her activism, her hope. But what has touched me most about her story is her relentless compassion and her insistence upon ours as well. Just days after she learned that her cherished son had been taken captive by Hamas at the Nova Festival, Rachel wrote these words in the New York Times, words that still preoccupy my thoughts. Every single person in Gaza has a mother or had a mother at some point. And I would say this then as a mother to other mothers. If you see Hersh, please help him. I think about it a lot. I really think I would help your son if he was in front of me, injured, near me. Even now, even after her unimaginable loss, I believe she would still do it. She would help any child in front of her, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The question is, can we all say the same? A mother's impulse to safeguard her child is in part biological. Science has demonstrated that the oxytocin produced within mothers' brains when we bond with our children creates changes in the ways that we perceive all children, making us more sensitive to their sights, their sounds, even their smells. That same oxytocin suppresses a mother's self-defense response, leading her to protect her young even at the cost of her own safety. This maternal impulse can propel a mother to take on what might seem like impossible threats to defend her child. In fact, just 3 years ago, a Calabasas mother successfully fought off a 65-pound mountain lion with her bare hands to protect her kindergartner. But while science suggests that the maternal impulse has its root in our biology, Jewish tradition teaches us that each of us must cultivate this impulse within ourselves. The Hebrew for womb, rechem, forms the basis of the word compassion, rachamim. When we act out of our genuine compassion for another human being, we emulate that bond between mother and child, the tenderness, the love, the kinship of carrying literally and spiritually another soul into life. The prophet Zechariah calls upon each of us to treat one another with rachamim. Meanwhile, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, the 19th century German scholar who founded modern Orthodoxy, reminds us that rachamim ought to stir us all, no matter our gender or whether or not we have children. Compassion, he writes, is the feeling of empathy which the pain of one being awakens in another. And the higher and more human the beings are, the more keenly attuned are they to re-echo the note of suffering, which like a voice from heaven penetrates the heart. And like the maternal instinct, rachamim is meant to be expressed through more than just emotion or empathy. In its highest form, compassion triggers an impulse that leads us to exercise care for another. Just as a mother instinctively seeks to protect and to care for her child, so too does the compassionate soul leap to care for another human being in need, especially a child in need. For as they develop the physical and the mental and the social skills necessary to navigate the dangers of our world, children depend upon our compassion for their very survival. Thus, in nearly all faith traditions, the welfare of children is considered paramount. And yet we all know too well that the world isn't always a compassionate place, not even for children. When I think of children suffering, I think of brothers Ariel and Kfir Bibis, who Rabbi Chasen spoke about on Rosh Hashanah. Ariel is 5 years old, Kfir a year and a half. Both remain captive underground in Gaza after more than a year. The last time they saw the light of day was on October 7, 2023, when their mother, Shiri, cradled them in her arms as they were brutally seized as hostages by Hamas. Or I think of baby Malak. Last November, Malak was found next to a Gaza City mosque, shortly after an Israeli airstrike killed dozens of people. She was 3 weeks old. When she arrived at a hospital in Rafah, no one knew her family or her name. So the staff called her Majul, Arabic for unidentified, until a nurse from the hospital named her Malak, meaning angel. Or I think of the 3 children I met this past January, living in a migrant shelter near the US border in Tijuana. Their father had been killed by gang members during their 10-month journey to escape violence in Honduras. Together with their 25-year-old mother, they waited in a crowded shelter filled to the brim with families just like them, desperately hoping for an asylum interview. I never even learned their names, which were kept secret for their protection. From Israeli children hiding from rockets directed at their homes, or anxiously agonizing about the fate of parents or relatives imprisoned in Gaza's tunnels, to Palestinian children orphaned when their homes exploded, leaving them as their family's sole survivors, to migrant children journeying across the Darien Gap in terror, to young women kidnapped and sold across the world, to children suffering from poverty and starvation. The world is brimming with dangers for our children. For the compassionate soul, any of these horrors can prove too difficult to bear. Taken all together, they can numb the mind past the point of conscience and compassion, and so we create protective shields around our hearts to help us manage our day-to-day lives, waking each morning, caring for our own families and communities, navigating our own loss and struggles. But all too often, the cries of these children are muffled by an indifferent world trying to tell us that we shouldn't care, that some children matter more than others, that we only have enough room in our hearts to protect our own, that there are bigger forces at play, that it's too much, it's too complicated, and it is. Israel and Gaza are complicated. Our immigration crisis is complicated. Our world and our lives are complicated. But the cry of a child is not complicated. Like a voice from heaven, it should always penetrate the human heart. Jewish tradition tells us that we must not permit the enormity of the task or the callousness of this world to desensitize us. Neither indifference nor bewilderment may avert our gaze from the anguish of children, of all children. Rather, in the wake of heartbreak and violence, we must become the sources of rachamim, the wellsprings of compassion. Cut away the thickening around your hearts, the Torah teaches, challenging us to expose our souls to the suffering of the world, even when it hurts. Because it's that pain, it's that hurt that calls upon us to act, to take on what might seem to be impossible threats, to safeguard a child in need. This is precisely what happens in our people's tale of redemption. When the Pharaoh's daughter comes down to bathe in the Nile one morning, she notices a reed basket floating by, and she picks it up. Upon opening the basket, she discovers a baby boy. This must be a Hebrew child, she remarks. And by adding this observation from the Pharaoh's daughter, the Torah is telling us that she knows she's picked up a Hebrew boy, one who, according to her father, the ruler of Egypt, ought to be drowned in that same river. But instead of heeding her father's command, the Pharaoh's daughter lifts up the crying baby, taking him into her arms and into her home as her own. Indeed, Moses' name, Moshe, is derived from her choice to draw him out of the water and deliver him to safety. Though Pharaoh's daughter remains unnamed within the Bible, the rabbis later name her Batiyah, meaning the daughter of God. For just as God heeds the cry of our ancestors and reaches out compassionately with an outstretched arm to rescue them from bondage, so too, Batya heeds the cry of a foreign baby boy and reaches out compassionately with an outstretched heart to rescue him from danger. Batya doesn't have to take this boy into her home. She can place him back into the Nile for another woman to find. She can hand him to the Hebrew girl who approaches her just after she rescues the baby from the water, or she can hand him over to her father's guard. After all, she is the Pharaoh's daughter. It's complicated, even dangerous, to act on her compassion. But Batya doesn't overcomplicate the cries of a child. She responds with rachamim, recognizing that the suffering of any child must penetrate the human heart. And in helping this one child, Batya rescues an entire people. Thousands of years later, when our people once again faced new threats to their existence, another woman refused to look away from the suffering of children in front of her. In 1938, just after Kristallnacht, the British government approached Truus Weissmuller, a Dutch Catholic social worker, to negotiate a refugee program to save Jewish children from the Nazis. Truus met with Adolf Eichmann, one of the principal architects of the Holocaust, to negotiate the evacuation of 600 Jewish children from Germany. He gave her until Saturday to find enough families willing to say goodbye to their children on Shabbat to fill the transport. She did. Though that was the last time that Truus met Eichmann, she negotiated a series of evacuations over the next 2 years that helped bring nearly 10,000 children from Germany, Austria, and Poland to Britain and Holland. Truus waited for each kinder transport at the border station in Emmerich with her signature umbrella before diligently arranging transport for them out of continental Europe. Although she never became a mother herself, she referred to the Jewish refugees she saved as her children. When Germany invaded the Netherlands in 1940, Truus returned from Paris immediately to get the last 74 children out of Amsterdam. Throughout the Nazi occupation, she brought food and medicine, forged documents to Jewish families held in transit camps. And despite arrests and interrogations by the Gestapo, she never stopped working on behalf of her children. After the war, she visited hostels to help orphan Jewish refugees find new homes. Among those she saved were Arthur Adler and his sister Melly, who left Germany and Holland on a kinder transport in late 1938. 4 months later, as Adler prepared to turn 13, Truus, a Catholic, arranged for his bar mitzvah at the Amsterdam Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. The following year, he and his sister reunited with their parents and their siblings in the US. Decades later, every time one of Arthur Adler's grandchildren became bar or bat mitzvah, he brought along the Bible that he received at his own bar mitzvah, an enduring symbol of the life-saving compassion shown to him by a complete stranger. When the world turned away from the suffering of Jewish children, Truus opened her heart to their anguish, enabling her to overcome impossible obstacles to defend children in need. Nor was she alone. Heroes like Nicholas Winton, who helped spearhead the kinder transport from Britain, or Raoul Wallenberg, who smuggled thousands of Jews out of Hungary, and dozens more like them risked their careers and often their lives to save Jewish families and Jewish children. Like Batya, they refused to overcomplicate the cries of children, nor did they surrender to the enormity of the task facing them. None of them saved thousands at once. Instead, they worked steadily and relentlessly like Truce, who saved one child at a time, transport by transport, because she felt in her heart that all children were her children, and their suffering was hers too. This is what it means to become true practitioners of Rachamim, to acknowledge what our souls already understand, that all children belong to us, and that their pain demands our response. On Yom Kippur, we imagine God sitting on two thrones, the throne of Din, of judgment, and the throne of Rachamim, of compassion. And we ask God to move from the throne of Din to the throne of Rachamim, to look upon us, God's creations, with mercy and with care. But we must move to a new place as well, from the place of otherness to one of closeness, from the place of resignation to one of relentless compassion. I want to believe, and really we all need to believe, as Rachel Goldberg did, that if my children, if your children were lost, if they were hurt or in danger, or God forbid their lives were at risk, that another human soul, no matter who they are or where they come from, would listen to their cry and help them. That the human impulse propelling us toward Rachamim, toward compassion, still exists, despite everything that we have seen and been through. And to know deep within us that this belief may be one of the only real things that still exists on a human-to-human, soul-to-soul level. No, we cannot save every child in danger. But we can't rationalize our disregard for each one simply because we can't protect everyone. Yom Kippur doesn't allow for that. It's a day to be honest with ourselves. Will we allow our pain to undermine our humanity? Will we allow our despair to overwhelm our urgency? Or can we instead commit ourselves to action and to hope, remembering that our hope resides with Truce and with Batya and with you and with me, unleashing our Rachamim one child at a time? During that same trip to the US-Mexico border I took earlier this year, our group made another stop at a shelter run by Jewish Family Service of San Diego. When we arrived, we saw families with nothing more than a backpack exiting a bus. They'd been traveling for months from places across the world. Young children, if they were lucky to still have their parents by their side, grasped their hands, and they shared a sigh of long-awaited relief and even a beaming smile when we, strangers from this unknown place that they knew nothing of, showed up and waved to greet them. When they saw food and clothes and diapers put out just for them. When they felt like their safety and their happiness after hundreds and hundreds of lonely and terrifying miles finally mattered to someone. As I remember those children, I can't help but think of Rachel's words, the words of a mother desperately wanting to see her son again, a call that would never be answered. I really think I would help your son if he was in front of me. I want to conclude with a prayer co-written about 10 years ago by a Palestinian mother and an Israeli mother. Something that may seem impossible right now, but that we must determine is still possible by allowing our rachamim, our compassion, to prevail. A prayer of mothers by Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum and a sheikha. God of life who heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, may it be your will to hear the prayer of mothers. For you did not create us to kill each other, nor to live in fear, anger, or hatred in your world, but rather you have created us so that we may grant permission to one another to sanctify your name of life, your name of peace in this world. For these things I weep, my eye runs down with water. For our children crying at nights, for parents holding their children with despair and darkness in their hearts, for a gate that is closing, and who will open it before the day has ended? And with my tears and prayers which I pray, and with the tears of all women who deeply feel the pain of these difficult days, I raise my hand to you. Please, God, have mercy on us. Hear our voice, that we shall not despair, that we shall see life in each other, that we shall have mercy for each other, that we shall have pity for each other, and that we shall have hope for each other. And we shall write our lives in the book of life for your sake, God of life. Let us choose life. The Torah teaches that Batya is suddenly filled with chamal, with mercy and pity, when she sees the tiny baby Moses helplessly floating in a basket, an instinctual compassion that she could not push away. On this Yom Kippur, as the gates begin to close, we ask God to write our names in the book of life. But we must inscribe them ourselves with rachamim, as mothers and fathers and caregivers and human souls everywhere, believing that someone somewhere will always show kindness to our children, and that no matter who they are, we will commit to doing the same for them.